So let's talk about the shock elite of the Chaos Space Marine battle line. Just how tough and dangerous can these armoured elites get? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're returning to focus on the forces of Chaos, and we're going to be doing an overview of Chaos Terminators in 9th edition 40k. As well as being thoroughly iconic, these armoured warriors are currently one of the strongest units in the entire Chaos Codex, so today we're going to do a full unit overview, a look at their datasheet and wargear, all the massive buffs and synergies that they can get, and some thoughts on Legion's loadout and use in game. Model-wise, the Chaos Terminator kit is at least a relatively recent one from Games Workshop, £36, €47.50 or $60 from Games Workshop directly, and a fairly recent plastic release from about the same time as those Shadow Spear boxes in 2019. Fairly good quality miniatures as Games Workshop ones go, I think. They're not too bad in terms of getting points on the board either. 3.1 points per dollar is quite good compared with quite a lot of 40k kits, and I suspect are usually going to be a popular pickup for new Chaos Marine players. If you were looking to pick them up in the UK, Element Games sells them for £30.60. The link to that's down in the video description below. And a small amount of the sales from that link does also go to support the channel as well without costing you extra. Obviously, with kits in 40k, I'd usually want to buy them for the models that you like. I think generally Terminators will tend to be at least fairly strong. They're certainly really quite good at the moment, though it is possible in future balance updates they might no longer be some of the best stuff. In any case, if you were picking them up at a discount, consider Element Games linked below. Getting onto their rules though, and here we have the datasheet for the Chaos Terminator squad, an elite choice for the Chaos Space Marine Codex, coming in at 33 points per model, or 38 each if you give them a Power Fist. In the latest Chaos book they do have a fairly mean stat line, movement 5 hitting on 3s, strength and toughness 4, a big 3 wounds now, and 3 attacks that's usually going to be 4, leadership 9 and a 2+ save with armour of contempt, making them very hard to shift unless you've got very high AP weapons, particularly if they're in cover. At base, for your 33 points, each model is equipped with a combi bolter and an accursed weapon. As they're Terminators, with malicious volleys, those combi bolters will be firing out 4 shots to 24 inches, so quite a good hail of anti-infantry fire there. And the accursed weapon now represents most of the power weapons in the box besides the fists, a catch-all profile for strength 5, AP -3 and damage 1, and 1 additional attack per accursed weapon that you have on the model. Strength 5 is quite a nice all-round profile, and it's got enough AP to make it count against things like Space Marines. We'll go through Wargear a little bit more detail in just a second, but in their new incarnation the Terminators do have a slightly more complicated datasheet. These were one of the units that Games Workshop kind of slightly made painfully fit into the actual box's options, so you have some very specific numbers of gear that they can take for certain models. All the restrictions are per every 5 models in the unit. One Terminator can take a Heavy Flamer or Reaper autocannon. Heavy Flamers are quite threatening with D6 plus 2, strength 5, AP -1 hits while they're using Let the Galaxy Burn. Reaper autocannons are heavy 4 but strength 7 and AP -2, damage 1. For combi weapons, either 1 per 5 can take a combi plasma, 2 can take combi melters, as 2 can take combi flamers. 1 Terminator can take a second accursed weapon instead of a combi bolter, so that would give you an extra attack at the expense of shooting. 3 per 5 can take Power Fists, and 1 per 5 can take a Chain Fist, meaning that you can't quite get to a full squad of Power Fists anymore. At least one model per 5 is always going to be armed with an accursed weapon, which is kind of annoying. For other special rules, they have Let the Galaxy Burn for the exploding 6s. They can use Warp Strike to teleport in if it makes sense. They get the 5+ invul save, but with a 2+ save and Armour of Contempt, that's rarely going to come into effect. And then the unit can take a Mark of Chaos for 15 points, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle or Slaanesh, but they can't back this up with an icon. Overall, they're a really tough unit of core infantry, arguably one of the biggest and best units to put synergies on because they're just very tough and very dangerous, and quite likely to be on the vanguard of a lot of Chaos Space Marine armies right now. If we look at those weapon choices just a little bit closer, it basically boils down to the choice of which melee weapons you take, which ranged weapon upgrades you go for, and which Chaos Mark you choose to dedicate them to. For melee weapons, you certainly can just leave them all with accursed weapons, though it will generally mean that they're going to struggle to punch up quite so much against heavy vehicles and things. I'd say if you are going to make any upgrades on the melee front, the Chain Fist are the highest value thing that you can take. They get D3 damage versus the Power Fist 2, but arguably that's often going to be a benefit, say if you're targeting things that are -1 damage or 3 wound infantry. Combine that with the better AP of the Chain Fists and the fact that they get a flat 3 damage against vehicles, and I think I'd pretty much always be tempted to take the 2 Chain Fists along if you were taking a 10-man squad. They're particularly high value to be putting on the unit champion, as they get an extra attack. Otherwise, for the power fist, they are going to make the squad generally more dangerous in melee, but for the 5 points, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily mandatory for every squad to pick them up. It depends whether you want them to be absolutely massively dangerous in combat, or you just want to have them as a bit more of a durable anvil and be better at bullying light infantry than taking down heavy stuff. For me, I don't really think that the dual accursed weapon Terminator is particularly worth it. I think that the extra 4 combi bolter shots are worth more than one additional accursed weapon attack in melee. The dual accursed weapon option is basically to represent the Terminator that can take dual lightning claws in the kit. For the ranged options, I think the Games Workshop have actually done really quite well at making them balanced. Pretty much all of them are usable, but none truly auto-include, I think. You certainly could just have the entire squad with combi bolters and have them be a decent threat to light infantry. 40 bolter shots at 24 inches on a unit that can move can pretty happily blast away a light infantry squad a turn, or at least stack a few wounds for some failed saves on more elite targets. The combi weapons are just a bit annoying that you can't just spam all of them across a unit anymore. You can't just take them with all combi melters and make them into a really dedicated anti-tank force. I think that plasmas, melters, and flamers are all pretty reasonable, to be honest. The flamers get d6 plus 2 hits with their flame profile, which is really quite potent, and plasma and melter will both help them out against hard targets a bit more. It seems that from seeing other people's lists, maybe the combi melters are the most popular choice, but not by a lot. Then there's the option of whether or not to take a combi bolter out for a Reaper autocannon or a heavy flamer. It seems people like the heavy flamer a little bit better than the Reaper autocannon. I'd say perhaps the Reaper autocannon might be better in armies like Emperor's Children, where you can move and shoot for no penalty. The heavy flamer isn't a terrible upgrade, particularly if you're deep striking maybe. An average of 5 or 6 auto hits with strength 5 is pretty good for 5 points. Finally, for Chaos Marks, I'd certainly take 1 on the unit. I think even on a small 5-man unit, the 15 points is worth it for the upgrade that you get. It just depends on which one you want, and often on which buffing characters you have available in the army. For the biggest Terminator squads, it seems that the Marcus Slanesh is perhaps the most popular. It gets the Terminator squad to fight first, but also allows some really cool options like the 5+ Feel No Pain spell, or that prayer for advancing and charging. Slanesh also has a fun stratagem to shoot enemy units when they fall back as well, which actually could be fairly powerful. To be honest though, I think literally any of them are fine. Zinch is quite a nice one for small squads. It basically guarantees you some extra survivability, and if it ever saves a Terminator's life, then it's paid itself back and then some. Nurgle gives you another layer of durability with extra toughness against strength 4 or strength 8 plus things. In addition, it allows you that transhuman physiology type stratagem. Only being wounded on 4s, no matter how good the enemy shooting is really nice. Finally, Khorne gives you +1 strength, which with accursed weapons takes them to strength 6. That is kind of handy against quite a lot of elite infantry type targets in the meta. Wounding things like Custodes, Tau battlesuits, or enemy chaos possessed on 3s really is quite a nice bonus. Generally, I think it's going to be worth taking 1 of these even on smaller squads, but it's pretty much absolutely mandatory on bigger ones, I think. Talking about buffs and synergies, as I mentioned earlier, at the moment Chaos Terminators do seem to be about the best unit for targeting a big squad with the nice buffs available in Codex Chaos Marines. They are the single biggest and most threatening core unit out of any in the Codex, and that means that a whole load of options are going to be maximally efficient when targeted at them. First up, we have the near auto-include of the squad relic in the Black Rune of Damnation. For 1 command point, you can give your champion a relic from a specific list. A lot of them are slightly underwhelming fighty type relics, not bad but not really mandatory either, but for some reason they gave them access to the Black Rune of Damnation, and it gives you the entire squad a -1 to wound, basically making them a ridiculously hard target to take out. -1 to wound is a crazily efficient debuff, and to be able to get this on a full Terminator squad for just 1 command point is kind of ludicrous value. For the most competitive Chaos list, it seems that more often than not, they have a decent sized Terminator squad with this relic attached. The Black Rune's good on just about any Chaos unit. Things like Possessed or Legionaries would also thank you for it, but with their 3 wounds and 2+ armor save with Armor of Contempt, Terminators are going to be the biggest choice that you can just turn into an unmovable brick. I think the Black Rune really incentivizes you to take a big 10-man unit and then double down with other powerful character buffs on this nearly unmovable squad. Having a Lord or an Exalted Champion in tow for some reroll ones to hit or wound isn't too bad, or Abaddon with his big rerolls would certainly help out too. Even more so if you're Black Legion with the 4 rerolls to hit and wound. One of the most common support choices for a Terminator squad is a Master of Possession. They've got the option of 3 rather excellent durability buffs for the unit. You can give them +1 toughness with one of the spells, which combos amazingly with the Black Rune. Now all of a sudden anything that's strength 4 will only wound them on 6s, and even strength 8 and 9 things will only wound them on 4s. You can also use Pact of Flesh to heal damaged models and restore slain ones, super depressing for your opponent with all the work that they have to do to chew wounds off these in the first place. And if you make the squad a Slanesh squad and also have a Slanesh Master of Possession, you could also cast a 5+ Feel No Pain as well, potentially all 3 spells in one single turn if you take a relic. I don't think standard sorcerers are particularly bad either. You could get +1 to hit on them with a decent damage output unit, Death Hex to remove enemy invulns, but I think in general the Master of Possession's defensive buffs are going to outweigh that. Finally, Dark Apostles can also be handy with a big Terminator unit. You do pay rather a lot for each prayer that you get out of them, so usually you do want those prayers to be used on an absolutely massive unit to get maximal value. The 4 reroll hits in melee is pretty nice, and maybe out of the selections that you can take, Illusory Supplication is one of the most interesting. 1s to 3s always fail to hit, and you can't reroll hits. Another really annoying barrier to inflicting damage to go with all the rest. Otherwise, if they need an extra spurt to actually get them into combat, then the Slanesh Advance and Charge prayer is very nice indeed. And another option to amp up their melee damage is the +1 to wound prayer. If your squad's got a lot of accursed weapons, then that could be a better buff than the rerolls to hit. Stratagems wise, and again, as even small units are really quite big investments points wise, just about most of the stratagems you can use on them will usually be quite efficient. They've got their own unique Chosen and Terminator one for a +1 to hit whenever you need just a little bit more damage output. That one could be quite good for a Power Fist armed squad in combat. For 2 CP you can take Veterans of the Long War. +1 to wound is pretty nice, either with mass combi bolters or loads of accursed weapons and things. It kind of depends on the target which is stronger. Usually, just for in terms of command points translation to damage, the +1 to hit I think usually will outweigh the +1 to wound though. For 2 CP, your unit can shoot while doing an action. If you desperately need to get an action done on a mid-board objective that you've taken, then paying 2 command points to get 40 odd combi bolter shots can still be a great investment. For 1 CP, you can advance and shoot as if stationary. That could allow you to get into position again while firing off lots of anti-infantry fire. And there's a few god-specific stratagems as well. Nogle's transhuman one, and Slanesh's shooting a fallback unit again to hit them with lots of shots. Plenty of the legions also have their own good options as well. Speaking of which, let's talk about Terminators in each one of the 9 Chaos Legions and Renegade Warbands. As a great big and scary core unit, they are going to be good in just about every army. They all have at least something that can massively help them out. I think almost every legion will be really attracted to Terminators as a key part of their tactics. For Black Legion, the +1 to hit on the charge and to the closest unit is nice. Might often mean that you just don't need to use that +1 to hit stratagem. Abaddon's rerolls are pretty excellent, both on the combi bolter shooting and accursed weapon melee. They've got a Bringers of Despair stratagem to allow them to jump into combats and fight first when they do so with an extra attack. You can get objective secured Terminators with one of their relics, which is a really nice advantage for them on such a tough unit, and the Veilbreaker plate could teleport them right to the other side of the board right from turn 1, forcing your opponent to deal with this really durable and dangerous unit. I think Black Legion in particular are an army that really like their Terminators. For Word Bearers, you can reroll hits with them in the first round of combat. They get some mortal wound protection, which is always nice on a unit that's very tough to kill otherwise. Dark Apostles are going to be an even better buffing option for them, being able to cast 2 prayers in the same turn. If damage does sneak through, you've got another option for cancelling it with the Hexagrammatic Ward, and they can add yet another layer of defense and durability to them with the Baleful icon, turning off enemy rerolls. The Emperor's Children's ignores modifiers rule is pretty good for things like Power Fists and those Reaper autocannons. Keeping hitting on 3s is really nice with both of those. As Slanesh Terminators, they could make good use of that Apostle's Prayer to advance and charge. They get extra AP on 6s, which is quite nice with those combi bolters for at least a little bit of AP threat. And then when they do get into combat, they've just got absolutely tons of melee damage stratagems that can amp up their combat prowess in all sorts of different ways. A few of them are a little bit command point costly, but they're not going to have many better targets than a big unit of Termies. I'd say perhaps Night Lords and Alpha Legion don't have quite as many things going for them. Night Lords have a +1 to wound against some units, though it does depend on their leadership. Pinning units in melee is pretty nice though. I guess theoretically, if you manage to charge an enemy unit, kill it and then pile into another one, then using the stratagem to prevent enemy fallback could be really brutal. It means that the enemy forces wouldn't be able to shoot your Terminators. Even if they are exposed though, they can activate a -1 to hit stratagem if that helps. For Alpha Legion, they can be -1 to hit as they advance up the board, provided they're a fair way away. Falling back and charging is pretty handy for Terminators. They do also have a Warlord trait to give them Obsec, and the option of a pre-game move before the game begins, hopefully to make them into a bit more of a threat that the opponent has to deal with. Some handy benefits, but maybe not quite as much that's going to amp up their raw might. For Iron Warriors, I think they're perhaps one of the legions that can really double down on making the Terminators into a massively durable brick. Their trait alone means that you don't get any wound rerolls against them, which combines well with illusory supplication to turn off hit rerolls. Ignores cover shooting is pretty nice on those combi bolters, but perhaps the biggest and scariest thing for Iron Warriors is that they have access to a -1 damage stratagem. Even after you punch through all their other layers of durability, that means that 2 damage shots could turn into damage 1, and 3 damage 1s into damage 2. They've even got a 5+ save against mortal wound stratagem to help out against those. For World Eaters, they get +1 attack at their basic trait, but far above and beyond that is the option to upgrade the Terminators to Red Butchers pre-game, casually basically doubling the Terminator's melee potential with fighting twice, and also meaning that they'll have more options for consolidating and piling into enemy units, as the Terminators are ridiculously tough already. Making them into a massive melee threat as well is just crazily above and beyond that. And the World Eaters even have a pre-game movement stratagem, which means that the Terminators could be getting into the midfield early to force the opponent to have to deal with them and threaten their units. If you are playing competitive World Eaters, I'd consider a unit of Red Butchers pretty much mandatory. They just seem to be hilariously dangerous for the cost. They would give up things like 5+ Feel No Pain from Slanesh though, I suppose. For Creations of Bile, they get a little bit of extra movement, so 6-inch move, and an extra pip of strength to strength 6, both of which are good things. They would also punish enemy units for trying to take them out in melee as well, if that's their best way to deal with the Terminators, as they fight on death and will slap back pretty hard. The Terminators will also have a much bigger threat range as well, with the option for an advance and charge stratagem, meaning that they could be charging things they wouldn't normally be able to. And I guess if you did choose to leave them unmarked, they could be an interesting choice for Fabius Bile's enhancements, though I think in general it's probably just going to be more worth it to pay the 15 points and get a guaranteed buff. Finally, we have Red Corsairs. Advance and charge is their whole thing, and it does make the Terminators a lot more threatening. Being able to make combats is really quite important, even if they don't do massive amounts for the Terminators besides that. I guess they've got that Relic Terminator plate that could give them a higher invul save if it made sense to, though with Armour of Contempt that's only going to come into effect against very high AP stuff. Overall, in conclusion, I think the Terminators are a standout unit in just about every single one of these legions. Perhaps armies like Red Corsairs or Alpha Legion maybe just have a little bit less synergy with these guys compared with other strong units, but even then the strength of their raw datasheet is easily enough to carry them, I think. So now we've talked through most of the biggest buffs and most dangerous synergies with the unit. Here's just one example of a big investment loadout, something kind of similar to things that I've seen in a fair few Chaos lists. We're not pulling any punches here. Between a massive Terminator squad and one support character, we're spending 505 points, so that's a quarter of the Chaos list in total, but basically gives you a massive anvil of Terminators that the opponent's going to struggle to approach, and certainly shouldn't be able to damage particularly efficiently. With the build, I've chosen to go for 10 Terminators for 330 points, upgraded with 8 fists, so 2 chain fists and 6 power fists, and given them the Mark of Slanesh for fights first and access to their synergies. In this one, they're just armed with combi bolters. You could easily upgrade to a few combi weapons or other ranged things if you wanted though. Of course, they also take the Black Rune of Damnation for 1 command point pre-game, so they'll be -1 to wounds, and then supporting them we've got a Master of Possession with the Mark of Slanesh for 120 points. They take the Liber Hereticus to cast an additional power compared with what they know already, and that means that you could be giving them +1 toughness for toughness 5, Pact of Flesh to heal 1 Terminator and revive another, and the 5+ Feel No Pain from Slanesh, making these into just a ridiculous anvil of durable armoured might. If you do manage to cast these powers without the opponent denying them, you've got 30 wounds here at toughness 5 with -1 to wound, a 2+ armor save with Armor of Contempt, maybe even light cover if you can get it, a 5+ Feel No Pain on top of that, and resurrecting dead ones. Just on average it takes around 8 overcharged plasma hits to slay just 1 Terminator model here, never mind any of the attacks that miss, and of course if you don't commit super hard to them and only kill 1 or 2, Pact of Flesh is going to make them come back fairly quickly. With all the power fists, they've got really quite decent melee damage just through weight of numbers and attacks there. If it makes the difference, then they can take +1 to hit, and depending on what legion they're playing as well, they might have additional melee bonuses, things like Emperor's Children ignoring hit penalties, or Word Bearers rerolling all hits. If you're going even heavier on the big Terminator synergy, you could maybe even include a Dark Apostle on top of this, Your choice of illusory supplication, reroll all hits, or advance and charge each turn, giving your choice of a big boost between durability, damage output, or threat range. I feel like there is some motivation when you've got a almost unkillable thing on the table already to double down on making them more dangerous. I consider stomping these guys up towards the middle of the board, maybe advancing and shooting if necessary with that stratagem, and dare the enemy to come anywhere near to try and take you off the objectives or risk a big power fist related charge. So overall, I currently consider Chaos Terminators to be an incredibly strong unit for Codex Chaos Space Marines. When they're well supported, they're perhaps one of the single hardest units to remove in the entire game of 40k right now, and pretty much all of the legions have something pretty helpful as a great option for Terminators that make them even nastier. For running them in the game, I think I would be typically tempted to take a big 10-man squad, likely start them on the board as they're tough enough to get there, and it means that they can already be a charge threat right from turn 1. Deploy them out of line of sight when light cover with the Armour of Contempt, and go forward to try and take and hold a central objective against all comers. For all their good stuff, I still think that they have some weaknesses. They are pretty slow on the board at only 5 inches, and even with the various advance and charge options, that isn't always super reliably if you roll a bit low. I'd say their damage output is okay but not super outstanding, the range threat's a bit mediocre, and even in combat their numbers aren't amazing, but hopefully should be enough to destroy most enemy units just through sheer weight of numbers. Finally, I feel like they're a unit that maybe has a bit of counterplay, just because you really want to invest such a massive amount of points and investment into one squad. It does maybe give your opponent a bit more chance for playing craftily and ignoring them and focusing on the rest of your army, perhaps just holding up the Terminators or move blocking them with chaff, and focusing on killing everything else on the board, and the Terminators still wouldn't be enough to win you the game if they can only hold one objective. Within the Chaos Codex though, they are pretty excellent frontline damage dealers. Maybe their biggest competitors are things like Possessed or Chosen. Possessed also have 3 wounds and are faster. Their damage output's okay, but they do trade core for some Demonkin buffs, so there aren't as many good synergies that you can put with them. Chosen are kind of similar to Terminators with their accursed weapons, but they don't get the 2+ armor save, and their shooting threat isn't quite as good. If you want Terminators that are basically a little bit more focused on damage rather than durability, and Chosen might well be one to consider though. Overall though, out of the 3, I'd still probably say that Terminators are perhaps the best choice for a big synergy unit at the moment. A great base profile, particularly with the Black Rune, to layer all your damage and defensive buffs. So I think we'll leave that there for looking at Terminators in the new Chaos Codex. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. How have these Armoured Bringers of Despair been faring for you on the board? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k updates coming. I do tend to post new unit reviews and tactics videos pretty much every day. We'll certainly have plenty more coming for the Chaos Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and that's how I can continue to make these videos quite so regularly. If you have been enjoying a lot, any support is massively appreciated, and the link to the channel's Patreon page is down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.